10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Well, this is the EMI 2001 broadcast color camera mounted on a Vinton HP hydraulic pressure pedestal by means of a Vinton Mark III pan and tilt head here in the middle. These cameras were brought into service in the mid-1950s, 1960s I should say. They came into service in the BBC in 1967, and they're used in most of the London production studios. They're 4-tube cameras, one for each primary and one for luminance. The tendency these days is to go over to 3-tube cameras, but we'll speak about that at a later date in more detail. These cameras have 1 1/4 inch tubes, and these days the tendency is to go to 1-inch tubes. But they're a very much liked camera, very much liked by cameramen. They're a cameraman's camera, and I'll just show you now 1 or 2 of the things that they'll do. John is the cameraman on the other end of the camera, and you see him in position, in an operating position, with his headphones, with his hand on the focus control on this side, his left hand there, and round on the other side, which we'll look at in more detail, his hand is on the focus control. Let's just see 1 or 2 things that the camera will do. If I can take over as cameraman now and ask John to sit in, we'll just have a look at the range of shots we can get. Thank you, John. The camera has a 10:1 ratio Angenoux zoom with a minimum focusing distance of 16 inches. This means you can get some quite useful close-ups, and from this sort of mid-shot I can zoom in progressively by twisting the twist grip to a very tight big close-up. I'm now about 4 feet away from the subject. At the minimum focusing distance, I'll try and get you a shot of my watch on the table. I'm looking down at it somewhat obliquely. I'm focusing as close as I can get and tracking in. I can't quite get close enough for the minimum focusing distance, but this is the tightest shot I can get, and this is the widest shot I can get on 50 degrees. The zoom lens angles, which we always talk about in television rather than focal lengths can vary, in fact, between different cameras. The zoom lens angle ratio is from 50 degrees, as you see it now, progressively in to 5 degrees, which we've reached now. Now for a little more detail about the operational controls. In my left hand I control the zoom control, and this is just achieved by moving the control to the left to zoom out, and to the right in order to zoom in. At the same time, the focus control is covered by the right hand here on the side of the camera. In the BBC, the preference is to have a double turn focus control, which doesn't make focusing quite so coarse. It's much finer control. Looking at the controls now on the back of the camera, the most important aspect as far as the cameraman is concerned is the viewfinder picture. And here we can just about see the viewfinder there. There's quite a high level of ambient light here in the studio, of course, and for this reason we have this hood around the viewfinder so we can keep out the extraneous light. Viewfinder controls are quite comprehensive on this camera. We have controls for width and height here, and for centering horizontally and vertically, so we can position the picture wherever we want on the tube to ensure we don't have any cut-off, and we can get the aspect ratio correct. Lower down we've got a control for focus, which is a very fine control, and you can't in practice notice much difference. And at the bottom, the usual controls which you see on all domestic televisions for brightness and contrast. The dimmer control here is one for dimming the cue lights inside the camera. Now, the on-air cue lights are at the top here. You can't see them, of course, unless I'm actually punched up on air. There's a meter in the center, and on the left there's a white light which shows you when the zoom is on manual. Now look, if we can look down here to the other controls on the back of the camera, there's another little cluster of controls here which are of importance to the cameraman. First of all, we have the filters. Now, these filters were initially intended to be for neutral density filters and color correcting filters for when the cameras were used on outside broadcasts. In general, in the studio, we're looking for as much light as we can possibly get, and so the filter position is always number 1, which is a clear position, allowing as much light as possible to enter the camera and reach the tube. In the studio these days, we usually have star filters on positions 2, 3, and 4. And there may be some residual filters left in on the other positions. I'll try and get a star filter, see what there is in this camera. There you see a 4-point star filter, a 6-point, and an 8-point. And I achieve this simply by dialing up the number on this filter wheel. 6-point, 4-point, and back to clear. It's as simple as that. And you can put in whatever other filters you like in any other positions. The filters, in fact, are in the side of the camera here, behind a little flap. And it's rather a fiddly job to change these filters, but it's not often done. The other controls on the back, this is an hour meter which used to record the hours for which the tubes were used. This was necessary when the tubes were on hire, and in fact I don't believe it's read these days. A heater switch which controls the tube heaters, and a cue light switch, on if it's down, off if it's up. The reason for that is that if you're doing a show, an audience show, and you don't want to give away the fact that you're on shot at the time, you can switch the cue lights off, or you may get a reflection in a window in the set, and you can lose this just by turning off the cue lights. Going down a little, we've got an external viewfinder control which enables you to receive on your viewfinder, superimposed on your own picture, any other external picture you may like to have. We may just be able to see that. You can see there, I'm not sure what that is, I think it's Studio Out. And I can switch that in just by flicking this switch. There's somebody kindly going through all the various combinations. The availability of picture on this is controlled by a switch in the CCU by the vision operator. And the way that we achieve whatever feed we want is by pressing this Call CCU button to speak to racks, as we call them. And we press the button and ask them to feed whatever output we would like. It may be camera 2 to match on a caption, or we may like to have Studio Out so that we can ensure that our shots match everyone else's in the production. And this is very quickly and easily done. This switch on the right here is a relatively unimportant one. It just really merely switches on the microphone on the cameraman's headset. It can save embarrassment at times if you switch it off while you're muttering under your breath. These three are production talkback, which is the production talkback from the director in the gallery. Intentionally, I say intentionally because it's not the case in the BBC, but it was intended by the camera manufacturers, and it's used in most of the commercial companies. A program sound pot here controls the amount of program sound that you get. In the BBC, I believe that's used for engineering talkback. CCU controls the talkback to the racks operator. So you've got these three knobs, and you can achieve your own balance. Now, moving on to this panel, this is probably the most important operationally on the back, and the only one which would tend to be operated during a production, apart possibly from star filters. These are preset positions for zoom lens angle. You can see as I depress them, the lights come on, and they take over then from the manual operation. And by using this little control here, I can set whatever particular angle I want. So if there's some point of reference I want to come back to very quickly, I can set it up on here by, for example, achieving that sort of framing. If I've been zooming number 1, and I'm there if I pan to it. Now, the major use for this is in fact to preset these buttons to the lens angles which correspond to the fixed lenses we used to use in the days of turret cameras. There's a wide tendency really to like to have these points as points of reference to go to, and normally we'd have them set up as 35 degrees, 24 degrees, 16 degrees and 9 degrees. We can then go to them as soon as we like, and they're very good points of reference to keep the perspective in the scene the same. The buttons at the bottom select the narrowest angle, which is 5 degrees, and the widest angle, which is 50 degrees. There's wide variation of opinion, really, on whether these should be used. A lot of cameramen prefer them as points of reference, but a lot of cameramen, again, don't use them at all. They merely use the zoom control, the manual zoom control. Personally, I like them because they are good points of reference, and it's useful to know where you are in relation to other things and to keep the perspectives matching throughout the production. Let's look inside the camera. Incidentally, I should say in passing that, of course, the controls on the viewfinder do allow you also to tilt it, so that, if I can show this before I go on to the inside, if you're craned up very high and tilted down, you can still see into the viewfinder. And conversely, if you're down and panned up, you can tilt the viewfinder so you can still see into the viewfinder. Very useful control that. It would also be of use if the thing swiveled from side to side, so that when one is doing crabbing shots like this, it would be a bit more easy to see into the viewfinder. A refinement. It may happen in the future that manufacturers can build this in. We very much hope so. Let's just look inside of the camera now to get some idea of the complexity. Down at the bottom, we see the lens servo equipment, and on the left here we can see the yokes which deflect the scanning in two of the tubes. These go in diagonally towards the optical block in the center, and there are two that you can see on this side, two which you can see on the other side. The only other control of any real need for the cameraman inside here, well, in fact the only one he should touch in the normal course of events, is this control, which is the yoke focus, and this enables you to set the focus of the tubes to the infinity focus of the zoom lens. It may have to be adjusted if the zoom lens is changed for any reason. Let's look round at the lens now, but before I do, I'll switch off the lens package by this switch, cap up the camera on this control at the back, which then means that no light can enter the camera and possibly burn the tube, and I'll put the chains on to the pan and tilt head. One on this side to stop it tilting down, and one on the other side, stop it tilting up. Now what I must also do for safety reasons, and if ever I want to take the camera off the mounting, is remove these pins from their stow position, train the camera down and insert them underneath these bars. The reason for that is that the camera weight acts down against gas pressure, which acts up in opposition to it, so that the camera is counterbalanced at whatever height you set the pedestal. If I were to take the camera off without putting these locking positions in, the whole thing would shoot up right to the top and there'd be a rather nasty accident. So this is a very important safety precaution before ever removing the camera, and likewise the zoom, which is quite a heavy item. Now we're in a position where we can remove the zoom lens. First of all, we remove the lens hood, which is a plastic lens hood. Doesn't really do anybody any harm if you bump into them with it. Now we can see the camera itself. I'll have to just cross to the other side. This is the K lens, and you can tell it by the rectangular plate at the front. This is to keep the weight of the front glass element down. Of course, with a lens this size, there's a lot of weight in the lens itself. Now I remove this, again another safety pin. I can depress this bar, push up the lever, and the lens is free to pull out of the camera. Quite a hefty package, as you can see, with the servos, and the lens itself is all contained in here. 10:1 zoom lens with a minimum focusing distance of 16 inches. We have another Angenoux type for these cameras called a J lens, and the minimum focusing distance of that lens is 3 feet. They're somewhat cheaper, so we don't have K lenses on all cameras. While we've got the lens out, I'll just put it carefully on the floor. Let's have a look now just inside the camera. As you see, there's not much left inside the camera carcass when we've removed the lens. There's a multi-pin connection there which feeds all the signals to the servos on the zoom. Servo lens iris, which is done remotely from racks, and the zoom and focus signals which come from the pan bar controls. So apart from the lens, there's not very much really in the camera in terms of electronics. Most of it is upstairs in the room we know as racks of equipment, the bays of equipment, the camera control unit which processes the signal. I'll put the lens back in now to show you just how simple it is. Push it fully home with the bar extended and depress the bar, put in the pin, and we'll take a look at the other side of the camera, the cable. Just turn it all around. The cable is just over 1 inch thick and comes into the camera on this multi-way connector here. This is really the major encumbrance of the camera. You can't pan round through 360 degrees. The camera is anchored to this point at the bottom on the pedestal to stop undue strain up here on the connectors. And so if you want to do a 360 degree movement of the camera, or possibly more, it's necessary to wind the cable around the camera and to pre-plan it by undoing this clamp. The zoom demand control plugs in to this socket here on this panel. On the left of that there's a tracker socket, and the need for this is if the camera is mounted on a large camera crane, you can talk to the trackers on the back of the crane and give them instructions. On the top are talkback outputs for anybody who happens to be helping you, usually when the camera's on a pedestal. And on the left here there's a mains outlet socket for driving such things as headlamps and any odd item of equipment you might attach to the camera. We've seen it pretty well now, I think. I don't think there's much else we can show except for refinements really which are of more interest to professional cameramen. Just briefly on the head, very briefly, there's a good degree of pan down at this extent and pan up, and there are controls on the head for personal adjustment to preference of pan friction, and round here tilt friction, which is a pad acting on this side plate of the head. Very good, much like head, and it's been in service for something like 12 years now. The pedestal crabs across the floor in any direction you want. All the wheels steer at once, and so the attitude of the base always remains the same. You can also pull this particular one by means of this tiller, which is very useful if you have a tracker assisting you with moves. Well, I think that gives us quite a good basic introduction to a broadcast colour camera, and I'd like to thank Crew 14 who've helped us out to do this little training production.